Hey everyone, I've noticed that many of you are enjoying the videos, but most of you haven't subscribed yet. We're super close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support could help us reach that milestone. If you're enjoying the content, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really makes a huge difference and helps us keep creating more awesome content. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. I woke up to the smell of freshly brewed coffee and Rachel's voice on a work call. It was early, too early for her usual weekend routine, but that was the thing about Rachel these days. Her schedule had become erratic, unpredictable, always on someone else's time. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, my mind drifting into autopilot. This wasn't unusual, the early calls, the sharp shift in her priorities. She was always busy, too busy for us. I got out of bed, moving through the motions of my own morning, but I felt it. The tension. Something wasn't right. I couldn't put my finger in it, but it was there like an invisible crack running through the middle of our lives. I brushed it off at first, chalking it up to stress or her usual obsession with work. Yet as I stood by the sink, rinsing my coffee cup, I caught a glimpse of Rachel at the dining table, her phone still pressed to her ear, eyes glued to her screen. She didn't even notice me. There was something off in her posture. Too rigid, too disconnected, like she was already a million miles away from me. I watched her for a few seconds, studying her without meaning to. The way her fingers danced nervously along the edge of her phone, the slight hesitation in her voice as she spoke. She wasn't the Rachel I used to know, the woman I married 10 years ago. Back then, her ambition had been part of what I loved about her, the fire in her eyes, the drive. But now it felt like that same ambition had consumed her, leaving me behind in the ashes. Mike, can you pick up the dry cleaning later? Her voice cut through the silence, snapping me out of my thoughts. She hadn't even looked up from her screen. Yeah, sure, I replied, but the words felt heavy in my mouth. I was saying yes, but the routine had grown cold. There was no warmth between us anymore. No small talk, no shared smiles. Just tasks. As the day moved on, the unease lingered. I couldn't shake it. There had been small changes, here and there, over the past few months. Her working late, the unexplained absences. At first, I had convinced myself it was normal, part of her job. She was a rising star at her company, always getting recognition for her dedication, for the hours she poured into her work. But now, standing in the kitchen with a cold cup of coffee in hand, I wasn't so sure anymore. I grabbed my jacket and decided to head out, take a walk, clear my head. But even as I walked through the familiar streets of our neighborhood, the tension followed me. My thoughts kept circling back to Rachel. Was I being paranoid? Was it all in my head? I passed the youth center where I volunteered on weekends. Sarah, one of the other volunteers, waved as she saw me approaching. She had this warm smile, the kind that made you feel grounded, like the world wasn't spinning out of control around you. I smiled back, grateful for the distraction. Mike, good to see you. You coming by later? She asked, her eyes lighting up. Yeah, I'll stop by, I replied. Got a few things to take care of first. We chatted for a few minutes, small talk mostly. It felt easy, natural. Nothing like the strained conversations I'd been having with Rachel lately. As we said our goodbyes, I realized how much I had been looking forward to these brief moments with Sarah. She wasn't Rachel. She wasn't distracted or distant. She noticed me. She listened. And that meant something. By the time I returned home, Rachel was already gone. Off to some meeting or another, no doubt. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at her untouched coffee cup, her half-eaten toast. It was like she had left behind the shell of our life, the routine. But her presence was missing. She was missing. I grabbed my phone, flipping through the calendar app, trying to remind myself of what we had planned for the next few days. But as I scrolled, I noticed something. A note in Rachel's calendar, something she hadn't mentioned to me. Dinner with G. It wasn't unusual for her to meet with colleagues, but there was something about this one that stuck out to me. Why hadn't she mentioned it? I didn't know who G was, but it gnawed at me. I tried to shake off the suspicion, telling myself that it didn't mean anything. But the seed was planted. Doubt had started to bloom, and I knew it wouldn't go away so easily. The next few days passed in a blur of work and routine, but that nagging feeling followed me everywhere. Rachel was always busy, always on her phone, always somewhere else. And I was left standing on the outside looking in. Then one night, as we sat down to dinner, I noticed it again, the way she avoided eye contact, the way her phone lit up every few minutes with messages she didn't bother to explain. We ate in silence, the air between us thick with unspoken words. I tried to focus on the meal, on anything other than the growing distance between us. But every time her phone buzzed, it felt like a slap in the face, a reminder that there was something, someone else taking her attention. "Who's texting you?" I asked, my voice steady but my insides churning. Rachel didn't look up. "Just work stuff." It was a simple answer, a dismissive one, but it stung. She wasn't lying, not exactly, but she wasn't telling the whole truth either. I could feel it. That night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. Rachel had drifted off quickly, her back turned to me, as usual. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Every interaction, every moment replayed in my head. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust her, but there was something she wasn't telling me, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection in the bags under my eyes told me everything I needed to know. I couldn't keep pretending. Something was wrong, and I had to find out what. I started paying closer attention to the little things. The way she always made sure her phone was with her, even when she went to the bathroom. The way she left the house earlier than usual, only to come back late. The excuses about meetings, the sudden weekend work trips. It was all adding up, and none of it made sense. One afternoon, I came home early from work, hoping to surprise her, maybe spend some time together like we used to. But when I walked into the house, it was empty. No note, no text, nothing. Just silence. I wandered into the bedroom feeling like an intruder in my own home. Her laptop was on the desk, the screen still glowing. Out of habit, I reached to close it, but something stopped me. An email was open on the screen, one she hadn't logged out of yet. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I shouldn't look, but the pull was too strong. I leaned closer, scanning the words on the screen. It wasn't just a work email. The subject line caught my eye. "Can't wait to see you again. Love, G." I stared at the screen, the truth hitting me like a punch to the gut. G, the person from her calendar. The person she'd been meeting in secret. It wasn't a business dinner. It wasn't work at all. My stomach churned, the room spinning around me. I stood there for what felt like hours staring at the email, the proof of her betrayal right in front of me. Everything I had been feeling, the doubt, the tension, it all made sense now. She had been lying to me. All of it had been a lie. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. But one thing was clear. I had to uncover the rest of the truth. I shut the laptop and leaned back in the chair, my heart pounding in my chest. The email felt like a hammer blow, leaving a hollow ache in its wake. Rachel wasn't just distant. She was gone. Mentally, emotionally, and now, physically. She was with someone else. Gary. The name tasted bitter in my mouth, like something I couldn't quite swallow. I should have seen it coming. All those late nights, the meetings, the secretive texts, I'd convinced myself it was just work. But deep down, I'd known. I just hadn't wanted to face it. The next morning, everything felt different. I couldn't look at her the same way. The routine was still there, coffee brewing, Rachel on her phone, the hum of her conversation floating through the kitchen, but it felt hollow, fake, a cover for the lies she'd been living. I watched her, quietly observing the way she carried herself, the way she always had that damn phone within reach, like it was her lifeline to something I was never part of. I pretended not to care, kept my voice even, my demeanor steady, but inside I was a storm of emotions. Rage, hurt, humiliation. Every word out of her mouth sounded rehearsed, as if she were playing a part she didn't believe in anymore. And maybe she wasn't. Maybe she had checked out of our marriage long before I noticed. The thought gnawed at me, cutting deeper the longer I sat with it. She left for another meeting after breakfast, and as soon as the door closed behind her, I felt a wave of nausea. I knew I had to do something. The suspicion that had started out as a seed had grown into a thicket, choking me. I couldn't let it fester any longer. I took a deep breath, grabbed her brush up again, and opened it. This time I didn't hesitate. I scrolled through her emails, feeling a sick sense of invasion, but I had to know. There it was. More messages from Gary. Meetings, dinners, weekends. It was all there, laid out in black and white. Every detail I hadn't been privy to, every secret they had kept. Each new piece of information was like a knife twisting in my gut. They'd been seeing each other for months. Rachel had lied to my face every day, smiled at me over dinner, kissed me goodnight, all while sneaking off to him. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to scream, cry, or break something, but I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I sat in the silence of our empty house thinking. My mind racing with all the possible ways I could confront her, how I could make her pay for what she'd done. But none of it felt right, not yet. This wasn't the time for rash decisions. I needed to stay in control, keep my head clear. I wasn't going to let her or Gary win by losing my composure. The following days were a blur of surveillance. Every time she left the house, I watched. I started tracking her movements, where she went, who she met. I checked her texts when she wasn't looking, read her emails when she left her laptop unattended. Every new piece of information only solidified what I already knew. She was cheating, and she was doing it without a second thought about how it would destroy me. Rachel had always been meticulous, careful, but even she had her blind spots. She never thought I'd check her phone bill. She never thought I'd look at her GPS history. The more I found, the deeper my anger burned. Every lie she'd told, every excuse she'd made, it all led back to Gary. But I couldn't confront her, not yet. I needed more. I needed to know exactly how deep this went. So I kept watching, kept gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to strike. She was careful, but not careful enough. She never suspected I was onto her, never once looked over her shoulder as she slipped out of the house or lied about where she was going. She thought I was oblivious. And I let her think that. One evening, a few days after my discovery, Rachel came home late again. The air between us was thick with tension, but she acted like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't just spent the last few hours with another man. We sat down to dinner, the clink of silverware the only sound breaking the silence. I watched her, my jaw clenched, as she picked at her food. "You okay?" she asked, her voice casual, but I caught the flicker of something in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or suspicion. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired, long day." She nodded, clearly relieved I hadn't pressed her about where she'd been, but I wasn't ready to let her off that easy. Not yet. Not until I had every last piece of this puzzle. After dinner, she disappeared into the bedroom to make another one of her work calls, and I took the opportunity to check her phone again. Another message from Gary. This time, it wasn't about a dinner or a meeting. It was about a trip. My stomach turned as I read the message. "Can't wait for the weekend. Finally, sometime just for us." The weekend. Our anniversary was this weekend. She hadn't even mentioned it. We'd planned to go to a small cabin up north, spend a few days away from everything, reconnect. But she had other plans. She was going away with him. I clenched my fists, anger flooding my veins. This wasn't just some fling. This was a betrayal on every level. And now I knew. I had enough. There was no denying it anymore. No hoping I'd been wrong. Rachel was cheating, and she didn't care if she hurt me in the process. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling while she slept beside me, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing inside me. Every breath she took was a reminder of her lies. Every time she shifted, I had to resist the urge to confront her right then and there. But I couldn't, not yet. There was something sickly satisfying about keeping this knowledge to myself, knowing that I had the upper hand now. I'd always thought I'd be the kind of person to blow up, to yell, to demand answers. But now that I had the truth, something changed inside me. I wasn't going to explode. I was going to stay calm, stay in control. Rachel didn't deserve the satisfaction of knowing how much she had hurt me. She didn't deserve anything from me. She had chosen Gary, and now she'd have to live with the consequences of that choice. The next morning, she left for work without a word about the weekend. No mention of the plans we had made. Just a quick kiss on the cheek, her lips cold and distant. I watched her go, and once the door shut behind her, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what was happening. I wasn't just losing my wife, I was losing everything I thought I knew about our life together. But I wasn't going to let her take me down with her. No, I had been patient. I had been quiet. Now it was time to act. I spent the rest of the day putting my plan into motion. I needed more than just the emails and texts. I needed undeniable proof, something that couldn't be explained away or denied, something that would destroy any shred of credibility she had left. I wasn't just going to catch her in a lie, I was going to catch her in the act. That evening when she came home, I played the part of the loving, oblivious husband. I asked her how her day was, smiled at her jokes, even suggested we plan something special for our anniversary. She agreed, but her mind was already elsewhere. I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't thinking about me. She was thinking about him. I went through the motions, pretending everything was fine, while my mind worked in the background, calculating every step what I would take next. By the time we went to bed, I had everything I needed in place. I had hired a private investigator earlier that day. I wanted more than just phone records and text messages. I wanted pictures, videos, irrefutable proof. I'd always heard that catching someone in the act was supposed to be the final blow, the moment of undeniable clarity. But when the investigator sent me the first set of photos 2 days later, it wasn't clarity I felt. It was rage, pure, unadulterated rage. There they were, Rachel and Gary, wrapped around each other like nothing else in the world mattered. Like I didn't exist. I stared at the photos for what felt like hours, my mind numb. They were taken just a few blocks from our home, at a small cafe we'd gone to a dozen times. I could almost hear their conversation, see the way she laughed at his jokes, touched his arm the way she used to touch mine. The life we'd built together was nothing but a lie, and the photos were the final proof I needed. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd ever felt before. It wasn't just the affair, it was the fact that she had done it so openly, so brazenly, like I didn't matter. Like I was just a background character in her life. I closed the file, my hands shaking. I wasn't done yet. This was just the beginning. Rachel thought she could get away with this, but she was wrong. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. She had destroyed our life together, and now it was my turn to destroy hers. In the days that followed, I isolated myself from the world. I barely left the house. I barely ate. I was consumed by one thing, replaying every detail, every moment, every word Rachel had spoken to me in the past year. I was searching for something I might have missed, some clue that could have warned me sooner. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. There had been no warning. Rachel was skilled at hiding her betrayal, at maintaining the perfect mask of a devoted wife while secretly discarding me like old furniture. Every time I felt the rage rising inside me, I reminded myself to breathe. I had to stay calm. The urge to confront her was overwhelming, but I knew better. If I exploded, if I gave in to my anger now, she'd twist the narrative. She'd cry, apologize, make herself the victim. And I couldn't let her win. Not like that. No, this had to be done with precision. I started my plan with one goal, to take everything from Rachel without her even seeing it coming. It wasn't enough to catch her. It wasn't enough to confront her with the evidence. I needed her to feel the same hollow emptiness I'd been living with for weeks. And to do that, I needed to dismantle her life piece by piece. The first step was financial. Rachel's career was her pride and joy. She lived for the recognition, for the accolades, for the power it gave her. But she wasn't as smart as she thought. I still handled our joint accounts, and I knew her spending habits better than she did. I started small. I made a few adjustments to our shared savings account, moving money into a private account she couldn't touch. It was easy. I'd always managed our finances, so she wouldn't notice. Not yet. Next came the house. The mortgage was under both of our names, but Rachel's contributions had been inconsistent. I'd paid the bulk of it, and that would work in my favor. I quietly contacted a lawyer to discuss my options. The divorce, when it came, had to be swift and brutal. Rachel wouldn't see a cent more than what I deemed fair. As I worked through the logistics, I kept one eye on her. She was still distracted, still thinking I was none the wiser to her affair. She'd leave for her work trips, but I knew where she was really going. I'd tracked her to Gary's place more than once, though I hadn't followed her inside. That wasn't part of the plan. I didn't need to see what I already knew. The knowledge alone fueled my every move. A week after I started putting my plan into motion, I had a breakthrough. I'd been spying on her phone more frequently, waiting for the right message, the one that would give me something solid to use. And then it came. Late one night while Rachel was asleep beside me, her phone buzzed. I slipped out of bed and unlocked it, scrolling through her messages. There it was, a conversation with someone else. It wasn't Gary. It was a name I didn't recognize, some guy from her office. The tone of the text was casual, but something about them made my skin crawl. The familiarity, the inside jokes. It wasn't just Gary. Rachel had been involved with more than one man, maybe more than two. The betrayal hit me harder than I expected. This wasn't just about one mistake, one affair. She had been lying to me for God knows how long, using me as a safety net while she entertained herself with whoever caught her eye. The humiliation burned in my chest like acid, but I didn't let it consume me. Instead, I refined my plan. I started gathering everything. Every text, every email, every bit of financial information I could get my hands on. I wasn't going to just expose her affair with Gary. I was going to expose all of it. When the time came, she'd be left with nothing. No job, no reputation, no friends. I'd make sure of that. But there was still more to do. I had to be smart, calculating. The weekend trip she had planned with Gary was fast approaching, and I knew it was the perfect opportunity to strike. I'd let her think she was getting away with it. I'd let her leave, thinking I was still clueless, still the doting husband she could manipulate. Meanwhile, I'd be setting the stage for her downfall. I contacted the private investigator again, this time with clear instructions. I wanted every detail of her weekend with Gary documented. I didn't just want photos, I wanted video, something undeniable, something she couldn't talk her way out of. The investigator was thorough. By the time Rachel returned from her weekend, I had everything I needed. Photos of her and Gary at the hotel, videos of them kissing, holding hands, acting like a couple without a care in the world. I watched it all with a cold detachment, the final pieces of my plan falling into place. But the real twist came when I went through the rest of the footage. Gary wasn't just her lover, he was involved in something deeper. There were phone calls, meetings with shady characters I didn't recognize, business dealings that didn't add up. I did some digging and realized Gary was using Rachel. He had been manipulating her, pulling her into something illegal. It wasn't just an affair, it was a setup. I sat back, processing the revelation. Gary wasn't just some guy Rachel had fallen for. He was using her, exploiting her connections to further his own agenda. And Rachel, blinded by whatever thrill she was getting out of the affair, was none the wiser. The realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about leverage. If I played my cards right, I could take them both down in one swift move. With this new information, I adjusted my plan. I wasn't just going to expose Rachel's infidelity. I was going to expose Gary's scheme. And when I did, I'd make sure Rachel was left holding the bag. She'd lose her job, her reputation, everything she had worked for. And Gary? He'd get exactly what was coming to him. I started gathering the evidence, carefully piecing together the financial records and the incriminating conversations. I found just enough to implicate Rachel without dragging myself into it. The beauty of it all was that I wouldn't even have to do much. The truth would speak for itself. All I had to do was hand it over to the right people. By the end of the week, everything was set. The private investigator delivered the final pieces of evidence, and I sent an anonymous tip to Rachel's company. They were big on integrity, on transparency. A scandal like this would ruin her. And when they investigated, they'd find more than just her affair with Gary. They'd find the trail of lies, the shady deals, the deception. It was perfect. Everything was lined up. All that was left was to sit back and watch it unfold. Rachel, oblivious to the storm heading her way, continued with her usual routine. She came home late, kissed me absent-mindedly, and went straight to her laptop. I watched her from across the room, wondering how someone could be so clueless, so blind to the destruction she had caused. She had no idea her world was about to collapse, and I wasn't about to give her a heads up. The following morning, I watched her leave for work as usual. This time, I wasn't filled with the familiar dread or rage. I was calm, collected, ready. By midday, the emails started coming in. Rachel had been called into a meeting. I knew exactly what that meeting was about. My heart raced, not with fear, but with anticipation. It wouldn't be long now. Within hours, I'd received confirmation that everything had fallen apart. And then, as I sat at my desk, my phone buzzed. It was a message from the private investigator. It's done. I leaned back, a slow smile spreading across my face. It was over. Rachel's career, her affair, her carefully crafted facade, all of it, gone. She'd been exposed for who she truly was, and there was no recovering from it. But the best part? I wasn't done. I hadn't even confronted her yet. That moment would come soon enough when she had nothing left to hide behind, nothing left to protect her. She'd be at her lowest and I'd be standing there, ready to watch it all crumble. For now, though, I'd let her squirm. Let her wonder how everything had fallen apart so quickly. Let her panic as she tried to piece together the wreckage of her life. She had no idea that I was the one pulling the strings. And by the time she realized, it would be far too late. I glanced at the clock. Rachel would be home soon. Tonight would be the beginning of the end, and I was ready. Rachel arrived home that evening, later than usual. She moved through the house like a ghost, her mind elsewhere, too consumed by her unraveling day to notice the storm brewing inside me. She had no idea what was coming. I watched her drop her bag on the counter, her face pale, lips tight. She poured herself a glass of wine without saying a word. I didn't ask how her day had been. I already knew. She sat at the dining table, her fingers tapping nervously against the glass. I could see it in her eyes, the flicker of panic. Her perfect world was starting to crumble. "Something wrong?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. Rachel flinched at the sound of my voice, clearly startled. She forced a smile, the kind she reserved for public appearances, a rehearsed mask. "Just a rough day at work. You know how it is." I nodded, pretending not to notice the tremor in her hands. "Anything I can help with?" She shook her head quickly, too quickly. No, just office politics. It'll blow over." It won't, I thought to myself, not this time. Rachel's world was already starting to implode. The investigation into her inappropriate relationship with Gary had likely begun, and it was only a matter of time before her company found out about the shady dealings Gary had roped her into. But I wasn't done yet. I still had cards to play, and I wasn't going to reveal them all at once. Over the next few days, I let the tension simmer. I played the role of the supportive husband while Rachel became more withdrawn. The cracks in her facade were widening, and I could feel her growing suspicion. She stayed up late, pacing the house, lost in thought. The messages on her phone were shorter, more frantic. Gary was starting to feel the pressure too. It was all unraveling, faster than even I had anticipated. But as with any good plan, there were complications. One evening, as I was checking Rachel's phone while she was in the shower, I saw a message that stopped me cold. It wasn't from Gary, it was from someone else, someone new. The text was vague, but the implications were clear. Rachel had been involved with more than just Gary. This was deeper than I had imagined. I felt a cold fury wash over me as I read the words, each one twisting the knife further. How many times had she lied? How many secrets had she kept? This revelation could have derailed everything. But instead of rage clouding my judgment, it sharpened my focus. I wasn't just dealing with a cheating wife anymore. I was dealing with someone who had made deceit her lifestyle. It made the next steps in my plan that much more satisfying. Rachel didn't see the first blow coming. 2 days after I discovered the new message, she came home looking like she'd been through hell. She didn't even acknowledge me as she walked through the door, her phone already in her hand, furiously typing. I waited, biding my time, savoring the moment. Then it happened. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and I saw her face go white. She stood frozen for a moment, then stormed into the kitchen, throwing her bag on the counter. I followed her, staying calm. "Everything okay?" Rachel spun around, her eyes wild. "Someone at work, they've accused me of having an affair with Gary. Can you believe that? I mean, it's ridiculous." Her voice cracked, and for the first time I saw genuine fear in her eyes. "That sounds serious," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," she muttered, pacing back and forth. "I have to fix this. I can't lose everything over a lie." I let that hang in the air for a moment before I responded. "Are you sure it's a lie, Rachel?" She froze. The silence between us was thick, suffocating. I watched as realization dawned on her, her eyes widening as the pieces started to fall into place. "Mike, what are you saying?" I took a step closer, my voice low, controlled. "I know about Gary. I know about all of it. And I know this isn't just about an affair, is it? It's about the deals you've been part of, the illegal ones. You're in deep, Rachel, and you're going to lose everything." Her face crumpled. No, you don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly." I let the words sink in, watching her crumble. "You thought you could get away with it. You thought you could lie to me, betray me, and I'd never find out. But you were wrong." She backed away from me, her hands trembling. "Mike, please. We can fix this. We can make this right." I laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "There's no fixing this, Rachel. You've already lost." That night, she barely slept. I could hear her pacing in the other room, talking on the phone, trying to salvage whatever she could. But it was too late. The evidence I'd gathered had already been sent. The investigation into her finances and her connections to Gary was underway. By morning, her career would be over. Still, she didn't know the full extent of what was coming. And that was the beauty of it. I had more cards to play, and the final blow was just around the corner. As I watched her deteriorate over the next few days, I felt a grim satisfaction. Every time she picked up the phone, every time she frantically typed out another email, I knew it was another step toward her downfall. She was grasping at straws, and soon there would be nothing left to hold on to. But just when I thought everything was going according to plan, Gary made a move I hadn't anticipated. He tried to contact me. I received the email late one night. It was short, but the message was clear. Gary wanted to meet. He knew something was off. Rachel had become erratic, and he was starting to suspect someone was pulling the strings behind the scenes. He wanted answers. I could have ignored it, but there was something about the way Gary had phrased his message that intrigued me. He wasn't just worried about Rachel's behavior. He was worried about his own secrets coming to light. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Gary wasn't as in control as he had seemed. He was panicking too, and that gave me an idea. I arranged to meet him the following evening. We met at a bar downtown, far enough from our usual stomping grounds that it wouldn't raise suspicion. When I walked in, Gary was already there, nursing a drink, his leg bouncing nervously. He looked up when I approached, his face tight with anxiety. "Mike," he greeted me, trying to sound casual. "Thanks for meeting me." I nodded, taking a seat across from him. "What's this about, Gary?" He hesitated, glancing around as if he expected Rachel to appear at any moment. "Look, I'm not sure what's going on, but Rachel, she's been acting strange. She's paranoid, and now there's talk of an investigation at work. I thought you should know." I leaned back in my chair, studying him. "Why are you telling me this?" Gary swallowed hard, his eyes flicking back to me. Because I think someone's setting her up. And if it's you, I need you to stop. The audacity of it nearly made me laugh. He thought he could reason with me, convince me to pick off. But I was too far in. I wasn't stopping. Not now, not ever. I leaned forward, my voice low and dangerous. Gary, you made your bed when you decided to sleep with my wife. Whatever's happening now, you brought on yourself. He paled, his confidence evaporating in an instant. I, I didn't mean for any of this to happen, Mike, I swear. It doesn't matter what you meant, I said coldly. You both betrayed me, and now you're going to pay for it. Gary opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. And if I were you, I'd start worrying about yourself. Because when this all comes out, you are going down with her. I left him there, sitting in stunned silence as I walked out of the bar. The final pieces were falling into place. Rachel's career was in ruins, and Gary would soon be caught in the same web of lies. It was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down for both of them. That night, I felt something I hadn't in weeks: peace. The plan was working, and soon I'd be free of the weight of Rachel's betrayal. But even as the sense of victory settled in, there was something else lurking beneath it, a question I hadn't anticipated. Would this revenge really bring me the closure I was searching for? Would watching Rachel and Gary's downfall actually heal the wounds they had inflicted? I wasn't sure, but for now, the plan was in motion, and there was no turning back. The day of reckoning came sooner than I expected. Rachel had been stumbling through the week, her nerves fraying at the edges as the whispers at work grew louder. The investigation had picked up steam. I watched her unravel slowly but surely, trying to piece together her collapsing life. But she still hadn't seen the full picture. She still didn't know that I had orchestrated it all. And tonight, in front of everyone she had spent her life trying to impress, I was going to show her exactly what she had lost. It was the night of a gala, one Rachel had been planning for months. She had always thrived on these events, relishing the attention, the status, the network. It was where she belonged, among the elite, charming them with her poise and ambition. Tonight was supposed to be another victory for her, a night to solidify her position as one of the key players in her company's future. But it would be her downfall. I arrived at the venue early, dressed in a sharp black suit, blending into the sea of polished attendees. No one noticed me, just another face in the crowd. Rachel was already there, working the room like a politician, her smile plastered on despite the storm brewing underneath. I stayed back, watching her from a distance, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Gary wasn't there. He wouldn't show his face, not tonight. The investigation had hit him hard too, and from what I gathered, he was already laying low, trying to protect whatever was left of his reputation. Rachel was on her own now, and I was going to make sure she knew it. As the evening wore on, I made my move. I stepped onto the stage just as the speeches were about to begin, cutting through the chatter with a calm, deliberate stride. The crowd quieted, eyes turning toward me with polite curiosity. Rachel, standing near the front, froze. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time in weeks, I saw real fear flash across her face. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady, carrying across the room. "I apologize for the interruption, but I have something important to share." There was a murmur of confusion in the crowd, but I ignored it, my gaze never leaving Rachel. Her smile faltered, her hands clenching the stem of her wineglass as she stared up at me. She knew something was coming. "I've been married to Rachel for over 10 years, I continued, my tone cold and even. "We've built a life together. Or so I thought." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. The room was silent now, everyone watching, waiting. But over the last few months, I've learned that the person I thought I knew is not the person standing before you tonight. Rachel's face paled, and she took a step back, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. There was none. "I won't bore you with the details," I said, my voice sharper now, cutting through the tension like a blade. "But let's just say that Rachel's loyalty has been elsewhere, with a coworker, Gary, and not just him." I let the accusation hang in the air, watching the shock ripple through the audience. A few gasps, whispers, eyes darting between Rachel and me. Her face crumpled as the full force of my betrayal hit her. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She was trapped, and she knew it. But that's not all, I said, stepping closer to the edge of the stage, my voice lowering, becoming more intimate, more personal. You see, this isn't just about an affair. This is about trust, about betrayal, about how someone can look you in the eyes every day and lie to your face without a second thought. The silence in the room was deafening. No one moved. No one dared to interrupt. They were transfixed, watching the scene unfold, like spectators at a car crash they couldn't look away from. I turned my gaze directly on Rachel now, my voice quiet but laced with venom. You thought you could get away with it, Rachel. You thought you could live this double life, playing me for a fool while you built your empire. But you forgot one thing. I've been watching. I've been waiting. She stared at me, her eyes wide, tears brimming but refusing to fall. Her entire world was crumbling before her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. And now, I said, stepping down from the stage, my voice dropping to a near whisper as I approached her. Now you have nothing left. Her breath hitched, and I could see the desperation in her eyes. She wanted to speak, to plead, but I wasn't finished. You're done, Rachel. Your career, your reputation, everything you've built, it's gone. And it wasn't Gary or your company that did it. It was me. I watched the realization hit her, watched as she crumbled under the weight of it. She had no one to blame but herself, and now, standing in front of all the people she had once commanded respect from, she was exposed for the fraud she was. There was no shouting, no dramatic scene, just silence. Silence that screamed louder than any words could. Rachel sank back, her shoulders trembling as she fought to hold herself together. The crowd had started to murmur, the reality of the situation slowly sinking in for everyone. Her colleagues, her so-called friends, they were all watching her fall apart, and no one stepped forward to help. They were just like I'd expected. Vultures, circling, waiting for the inevitable crash. I didn't say anything more. I didn't need to. I'd done what I came to do. I turned and walked away, leaving Rachel standing alone in the middle of the room, her life shattered around her. I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just a hollow emptiness where my anger had once been. Revenge wasn't sweet, it was bitter, leaving behind a void that couldn't be filled. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I breathed deeply, trying to find some sense of closure. I had won. I had destroyed her. But as the adrenaline faded, I realized something that made me stop in my tracks. I didn't care anymore. Rachel was nothing to me now. A ghost, a fading memory of a life I no longer wanted. The power she had held over me, the anger, the betrayal, it was all gone. She was insignificant, and in that moment I understood the real revenge wasn't in tearing her down. It was in walking away. It was in reclaiming my life, my peace, without letting her have any part of it. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the contact labeled Sarah, and sent a simple message. You free to talk? It was time to move on. Rachel would have to deal with the fallout on her own. The company would chew her up and spit her out. And Gary, well, he'd be caught in the crossfire soon enough. But that wasn't my concern anymore. I had done what I set out to do and now it was over. As I walked down the quiet street, the weight I had carried for so long finally began to lift. The future stretched out ahead of me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The past was behind me. Rachel was behind me. I smiled, letting go of the last of the anger, the hurt. It was time to start living again, time to rebuild, and this time I'd do it on my own terms. With one final glance back at the building, I turned the corner and disappeared into the night. The morning after the gala, I woke up in my empty house. The silence that once pressed in on me like a suffocating weight now felt different, lighter maybe. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window, the pale light of dawn creeping across the room. The events of the night before played through my mind, but they didn't haunt me the way I thought they would. I had expected to feel triumphant, vindicated even. Instead, there was an odd sense of calm that settled over me, a strange, hollow peace. Rachel was out of my life for good. Whatever happened next, to her, to Gary, to the world she'd tried to build, wasn't my concern anymore. I'd walked away from it, from her, from the bitterness and betrayal that had once consumed me. But the emptiness that lingered wasn't something I could easily shake. It was like standing on the edge of something vast and unknown, staring down into a future that had no clear shape. I had won, but the victory hadn't filled the void. It had simply made room for something else, something new. I wasn't quite sure what that was yet, but for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to find out. I got dressed slowly, letting the routine of the morning ground me. As I moved through the house, making coffee, tidying up, I realized how quiet it really was. There were no sounds of Rachel bustling around, no tension hovering in the air, no passive-aggressive silences filling the space. It was just me. And strangely, I didn't mind it. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was Sarah. "Can we meet?" her message read. Simple, no frills. I smiled, grateful for the timing. I replied quickly, "How about the park?" "I'll bring coffee." Her response was immediate. "Perfect." An hour later, I found myself at the small park where we used to meet. It had become a quiet refuge for both of us over the past year, a place where we could talk about things that didn't fit anywhere else in our lives. I arrived early, sipping the coffee I'd picked up on the way, and waited on the same bench we always sat at. Sarah showed up not long after, her dark hair pulled back, her face open and unguarded in a way that felt like relief. She smiled as she approached, and something inside me settled just seeing her. "Hey," she said, sitting down beside me. "Thanks for this." "Anytime," I replied, handing her a cup of coffee. "You okay?" She took a sip, nodding thoughtfully. "I am now. Had a rough morning, but being here helps." We didn't dive into the details of whatever had been weighing her down, and she didn't ask about last night. She knew enough about my situation with Rachel to understand I needed space before I was ready to talk. But just sitting there with her, the conversation flowing easily between moments of silence, felt like the start of something new. It wasn't about romance, not yet. It was about connection. After months of living in the shadows of Rachel's betrayal, I was finally letting someone in again. Sarah and I had always had an unspoken understanding, a quiet kind of companionship that didn't need words to make sense. Maybe it was because she had her own scars, her own story of loss and survival. Or maybe it was just that we fit in ways I hadn't realized until now. We talked for a while about nothing in particular, and it felt like shedding a layer of armor I'd been carrying around for too long. By the time she left, I felt lighter. The future was still unclear, but it wasn't as daunting as it had been when I woke up. Over the next few weeks, things began to shift. The legal fallout from Rachel's affair played out in the background like white noise. She and Gary were both under investigation at work, their reputations crumbling. I didn't keep track of the details. My lawyer handled everything regarding the divorce and our finances. But I knew Rachel's empire was falling apart. She'd be left with nothing, the consequences of her actions finally catching up to her. And yet, I didn't care. I didn't feel the satisfaction I once thought I would. It was like watching a distant storm, something destructive but far removed from my world now. I'd built walls between myself and that part of my life, and nothing could breach them anymore. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in months, spent time at the youth center where I volunteered, and slowly Sarah and I grew closer. There was no rush, no need for anything more than what we were in the moment. We shared coffee, talked about our days, and filled the gaps in each other's lives with something real, something meaningful. She never pressed me about Rachel, and I respected her space regarding her past. It was unspoken, but we both knew there was something more between us waiting for the right time. One day, after weeks of this quiet rebuilding, I found myself standing in the middle of my kitchen, staring at the table where Rachel and I had shared so many empty meals. The weight of our old life together, the betrayal, It no longer held power over me. I was free of it, free of her. It was as if a final thread had been cut and I could finally let go. I sat down at the table, running my fingers along the wood, remembering the person I had been when I first noticed the cracks in our marriage. That man was gone now, replaced by someone who had been through hell and come out the other side, stronger, smarter, and maybe just a little bit harder. But there was peace in that transformation. I wasn't bitter anymore. I had reclaimed my life, and I wasn't going to let the past define me. The phone buzzed again, breaking my thoughts. It was Sarah. "You free for dinner tonight?" her text read. I stared at it for a moment, a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. This wasn't just a casual invite. Things between us were evolving, and we both knew it, slowly but surely. I replied, "Absolutely. Where should we go?" Her response came back with a smiley face and a restaurant suggestion. I closed my phone and leaned back in the chair, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time: contentment. I wasn't sure what the future held, and for once, that didn't scare me. Life was unpredictable, messy, and sometimes downright cruel, but I had survived it. I had faced down my demons, taken back control, and now I was free to shape the life I wanted. As the sun set outside the window, casting long shadows across the room, I stood up, grabbed my keys, and headed out the door. The past was behind me, the future wide open. Whatever came next, I was ready for it. This was my life now, and I intended to live it on my own terms.